Hi, I'm Rima+Laibow, MD. I'm the Medical Director of the Natural Solutions Foundation. And I'd like to tell you about what Codex, which means the United States and its following nations, is doing for the multinational corporations that make GMO organisms. What they're doing is hiding from you. They're hiding from the consumers of the world because they do not want you to know what the food is that you're eating. They don't want you to know that you're consuming GMO foods and that you're changing your DNA and changing the DNA of your descendants, if you have children. They don't want you to know that your fertility is impaired. They don't want you to know that your organs are damaged and those of any children that you might have. They don't want you to know that your DNA is changed forever. They don't want you to know that once GMO food becomes the only food available, they, the multinational corporations, can decide whether you can have any. They can decide what gets grown. They can decide what price they charge for it. They don't want you to know that GMO food increases when it's grown as a crop. The amount of pesticide used, the amount of herbicide used, that GMO crops lead to decreased profits for farmers, increased prices for consumers, superweeds, superpests, and losses in biodiversity and the safety of our world that can never be repaired. Why would they want you to know that? You might not want to buy their products. And indeed, most of the countries around the world demand that GMO foods are labeled. And the United States, of course, is using every dirty trick in the book to make sure that they squash that demand. One of the sets of dirty tricks is at Codex, where they have been trying so far unsuccessfully for about 17 years to prevent the discussion of whether GMO food should be labeled. The deal is, if they can drop the discussion, then countries have no standard for labeling, and they can not label their GMO foods, or their GMO seeds, or their GMO fish, or their GMO whatever. Now, the countries of the world, at least on this, have been smart enough to resist the United States pretty significantly. Yesterday, from about 9 o'clock in the morning till, about 3:45 in the afternoon, the countries of the world battled with the United States, with Argentina, with Mexico, with Canada, with Australia and New Zealand. And they said, no, it doesn't matter whether you want labeling or not. We have the right to have labeling for our people. The United States said, we have to have text in the document that we're working on that says that GMOs are the same as non-genetically modified food. We have to have text that says countries don't have the right to have national labeling standards. We want text that says that we're not even going to use the term genetically modified or genetically engineered. Nope, we're going to change the word to biotechnology, as if that somehow would change and hide the fact that the food is GMO. Well, this went on and on and on and round, and a consensus which had been reached for a statement that says countries have national labeling authority for GMOs, that foods derived from genetic modification are labeled as such. The text said that the countries had the right to a standard and that guidance was being offered the United States, Argentina, and the Biotechnology Industry Organization. And I would remind you that bio, or bio, is the word that many people around the world use in place of what we call organic. So it's a particularly clever and deceptive act, don't you think, for the Biotechnology Industry Organization to name itself bio, which kind of implies that they're organic and clean and that they're really on the side of good food. They're quite clever, these people. Anyway, every time a consensus was reached, what happened was that Argentina and BIO, the observer group, and the United States said, no, we don't agree. Well, of course, consensus has not been reached because the countries that don't want consensus to be reached keep pointing out, we don't agree. And as Singapore said, the majority of countries here have indeed agreed on a statement for this document, a definition and an opening statement, which they'd been working on for 3 years. But each time the chairman would say, well, we have to change it. And he'd change it back to the U.S. proposal, which was the one that gave no information and no rights and said that GMO foods are the same as non-GMO foods. Of course, they call them biotechnology foods. And countries like the EU, which happens to be on the right side of this argument, would say, wait a minute, we already have a consensus. Singapore said, we already have a consensus. Other countries said, we already have a consensus. So the chairman said, okay, we're going to break for lunch, and over lunch we're going to talk about it some more informally, without translation, so only English-speaking delegates could participate. And then we'll come back after lunch and talk about it some more. So he came back after lunch, and he proposed basically what the U.S. wanted. The delegate from Kenya said, you can call it anything you want. You can manipulate it any way you want. But this is not what the consensus was. This is not the document that we want. So the chairman said, tell you what, let's go back to the table again. Why don't we have another round of discussion? Why don't we, and the EU said, why don't we meet between now and next year when this committee meets again and have another meeting, this one in Brussels, with translation in English, French, and Spanish, and we'll talk about it some more. And so that's what they're doing, postponing, and postponing, and postponing. Meanwhile, countries that try to label their food are met with strong-arming and economic pressure by the United States and its little ducklings that run after it, its toxic ducklings. Now, interestingly, the consumers' organizations that were present said, wait a minute, you're saying that there's no difference, U.S., between genetically modified and ungenetically modified food. If there were no difference, then there would be no way to patent them. You're saying that we don't need a safety assessment, but if we didn't need labeling and a safety assessment, we wouldn't be talking about this item. We wouldn't have had a task force on risk assessment. This doesn't make sense. And indeed, it doesn't make sense. But this is the kind of shenanigan that the U.S., working for the biotech industry, tries to pull to hide the fact that biotech foods are dangerous and bad for your health.